Hey guys, welcome back to the Lawrenceville Bicentennial Podcast. Today is a little bit of a spooky episode where we talk about floating light orbs and strange sounds. Guys, it's spooky around here. Check it out.
All right, guys, it's that spooky time of year. It's never too early to start Halloween. Welcome to October's Halloween Lawrenceville Bicentennial Podcast. I'm Nate McGill, your host from Gwinnett Magazine. And today we are here with the wonderful Tim Whitson of the Lawrenceville Ghost Tours, and brought to you by Aurora Theater. And man, this is exciting because we get to tell some history in the form of its ghost stories. So, man, why don't you first start off by telling us a spooky tale? Why don't we just jump right in? Like, can you just jump right in and then we'll backtrack?
We can jump right in.
Let's jump right in. I want to hear something spooky. We got a pumpkin and everything. Let's go.
There you go. Well, right at the very beginning of the tour, we actually delve into the story of Patrick Burns, which some people might remember his name. He's done a little bit of ghost hunting before in the area.
Okay.
But back in 2001, so this is a couple of decades ago, he went down to the Lawrenceville Cemetery. And he didn't just go down he went down and for a short visit, and once he put his foot inside the door, he started to get chills down his back. And he immediately knew something paranormal was happening here. Yeah. And so the very next night, he decided to go ahead and spend the night in the cemetery. But he didn't spend the night alone. He actually got some guys from 11 Alive News. In a cemetery. Okay, gotcha. You'll get it later. But so he and a reporter from the 11 Alive News are down in the cemetery. And as it's getting darker, they start to see stranger and stranger things. And this was way before the TV show.
Oh, okay.
So as they're walking around, he's got, Patrick Burns has a personal camera. And of course, the reporter has a big old reporting camera.
Right.
And they're starting to walk around and they start to notice in the screens of their cameras, balls of light. Floating in midair.
Interesting.
And more than just that, they'll pass through certain areas and it'll seem like a curtain of light passes over their screen just briefly, kind of like gauze on the screen. And Patrick Burns looks at Joel, the reporter that's there with him. He says, something paranormal is happening here.
I think I remember this story. This was aired on 11 Alive.
And there's a link on YouTube that you can actually tie to the show that folks can go and see him and Joel actually walking around.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
You see these orbs wasn't all they saw. They'd be walking around. And well, it wasn't all they experienced. They'd be walking around. They'd hit a spot in the cemetery and the temperature would drop by 30 degrees. So this is a normal kind of summer evening, late fall evening. A little bit warmer, but they'd hit these spots and it'd get real cold.
Cold spots.
And then they'd move out of it.
Sign of ghosts.
Yep. Regular temperature back in, cold. And to make matters worse, in those same spots, whenever they'd step into the cold spots, the batteries on their camera would die.
Wow.
Just like that.
Crazy.
Then they'd go, replace their battery, come out to the same spot, it'd get cold, it'd die again. And now if that happened once or twice, you could call it faulty batteries.
Right.
It
kept happening.
It happened a half a dozen times while they're down there in the cemetery.
The world?
But the very strangest thing that they experienced actually happened after they got back from filming that night. They were reviewing a lot of their footage, and in some of their footage, they started to hear something.
Like voices?
Well, particularly one voice.
Oh,
it was a woman's voice. And it was mumbling and chattering and going on and on. Real difficult to understand. And they tried to see if they could clean up the audio and figure out what it was saying. And they never could make out a bunch of words. And if you want to know why they heard that sound.
Yeah, I do. I want to know why they heard that sound.
You're just going to have to come on the tour and find out.
Oh my gosh. Dude. That's a hook.
There you go.
I like it.
There you go.
Why don't you tell us about the tour? How did the Lawrenceville Ghost Tours get started? And, maybe tell us some of the history of the tour itself.
Yeah. So, soon after Patrick Burns actually visited the cemetery, 4 or 5 years later, there was a fella trying to do a bunch of renovation around downtown.
Okay.
And part of that renovation was trying to get businesses to move in. Part of it was involved getting the Aurora Theater to move into the Lawrenceville area.
Right, yeah.
And as part of that, he actually went on a ghost tour in St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
And he came back and he went to the Aurora Theater. He said, this ghost tour was amazing.
Hey, this is what we got to do.
Lawrenceville must have a ghost tour.
Oh, very cool.
And so I'm not sure all that went down that very first year.
Yeah.
But all I know is that within 3 months of him saying that, the Aurora latched onto it and they got a ghost tour started.
Well,
that was back in 2005.
They're fun. They're fun for the whole family. You can take your family and get a little spooky. And, you know, like it's not interactive. It's different from, you know, eating popcorn, watching a scary movie. You're out there hearing stories that happened in where you're walking. So it's fun. If you've never gone on a ghost tour, go down to Lawrenceville and check out this thing. That's amazing. So what other kind of stories can you tell us from the history of Lawrenceville over the years, like the spooky tales?
Sure. Well, Lawrenceville is the oldest incorporated city in Gwinnett County.
That's right.
So that's 1821.
Right.
And as a result of that, a lot of the buildings and a lot of what's happened around there dates way, way back. And so one particular example, without giving away too much of the tour, one particular example is all of those shops along Crogan Street are pretty old buildings. I'm not exactly sure the date on a lot of them, but you'll notice that the fronts of the buildings have been renovated over the years and they've kind of been upkept.
Absolutely.
But if you walk in the alley behind those shops, it's called Honest Alley.
Yeah.
And there's a story behind that.
Right.
For another time. But down, if you walk down Honest Alley, you can look at the back sides of those buildings and very little work has been done on them. They've done a little bit of a paint job on a few of them.
Sure.
But you can tell that they're pretty old buildings.
Right.
And so what happens with older buildings like that when you start doing some renovations, if there's any sort of spirit or presence in
they
that
don't like
space.
change.
Yeah, they don't like change. I mean, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
When things start changing, they start getting uncomfortable.
Sure.
And if you think about it, if you're used to a space and someone builds a wall right in the middle of it, you might start to get upset and try to let somebody know about that. So each of those shops has their own story of what's happened there.
Wow.
And most of it is unexplainable.
Yeah.
It happens a few times or it happens consistently, but it's not frustrating enough to get anything done about it.
Like things moving around, strange noises.
I mean, one place down, I think there's an old antique shop. I can't remember if it's one that's already there or not, or that's still there or not. But they had like a little felt Santa doll. And they kept it by the front door during the Christmas season so that as people came in, they saw this cute little Santa doll. But the employees swore that every night it moved to the back door. So when they'd come open the next day, they'd open the back door and there would be the little felt Santa. They'd move it back to the front door and then they'd come back the next day.
That's got to be freaky, man. Like that's got to freak you out. You move it. I know it's there. Next morning, not in the same spot.
Well, and like there's a little, I think it's called Good Karma, little jewelry shop there.
Yeah.
They've got all sorts of stories where they'll be working on a piece of jewelry or they'll leave it out on a desk to show it to somebody and they'll turn their back for a few minutes and it'll completely disappear.
Yeah.
They have no idea where it goes. And then like weeks later, it will appear in some completely out of the way place. There'll be a couch and it'll be stuffed in the cushions of the couch
just
or
moving things around
behind something where they never would have put a piece of jewelry.
Wow. It's like things like Amityville Horror where like the money goes missing and he freaks out because he thought he had the money and then he ends up like the ghost took the money.
And personally, I think the most frightening story of what's happened down on the shops at Crogan Street is there's an old, it's not there any longer. There was a spa out there and they just hired on a new employee. And they've been training her up, making sure that she could do the front desk and everything.
Right.
And they just taught her all about inventory, how to go down, get more stuff for the front shop windows and everything. And so they asked her if she'd go downstairs and grab some more bath salts to put in the front windows. She went downstairs and she was down there maybe a minute, 2 minutes, when they heard a blood-curdling scream from the basement. All the ladies upstairs, I mean, they rushed downstairs to see what's the matter.
Yeah.
And this new employee is standing in the middle of the basement floor with her phone in her hand. Her hand's just shaking. And as they draw closer, she turns that screen towards them, and they see a message blinking on the screen. It says, "No service." They had to let her take the rest of the day off. I mean, if that's not paranormal, I don't know what is.
What is happening in Lawrenceville? Guys, it's the Bicentennial year. It's 200 years of history in Lawrenceville. And bicentennial years are extremely paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
If you look through the annuals of history and most movies directed by John Carpenter, you will find that anniversary years are when the past comes back to get you. Mm-hmm. The ghost pirates show up in a fog. Bad things occur.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ever afraid when you're out there giving this tour? Do you ever get a little spooked out?
I'll be honest, for myself personally, not really. But it's because I kind of know the different spots.
Right.
I mean, ghosts are a lot like anybody. If you're kind to them, they'll generally be kind to you. And if you go into a place and you start to get a little spooked, then you can just speak out loud to them. Yeah. Hey, I'm not interested in being messed with today. And a lot of times they'll leave you alone.
Wow.
That's if you have a good conscience. If you have a bad conscience, I can't really promise anything. But.
Or if you move in on their real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Guys.
I mean, real estate does cause a lot of arguments.
It's you know, there's all kinds of different kinds of spirits and spooky tales. I knew this story that I've always wanted to tell on history podcasts and before about the Barbara Mackle story. She was buried alive in Gwinnett County for like 80-something hours. Mm-hmm. Crazy. And, the connection with Lawrenceville is that the FBI headquarters kind of got set up to sort of solve this case of what happened to this kidnapped missing girl who's been buried alive. And when I went back to go look at that, it was crazy, the connections, because basically the thing that had happened was the 1968-69 flu pandemic, the Hong Kong flu. Which is kind of crazy. So everybody was kind of huddled up. They were sick. She was at home. 2 police officers knock on her door. She opens it up. They say, hey, look, your boyfriend's been in a car accident. And so she goes with them thinking that, it's 1968. There's not cell phones. You can't check this stuff. She gets in the car with these dudes and disappears. And the next thing you know is I think it's her father, who was a land developer, gets this ransom note that basically says, pay up $500,000 or, you're never going to find her. And there was a picture of her, said, I'm kidnapped on it, and they basically put her in a hole with oxygen with only a number of hours to live. And if this sounds like a TV show or a movie, like it was, like they made an actual daytime TV show. It was really bad, way back in like maybe the 80s, 70s or 80s probably, about the whole ordeal. But it's just this wild, crazy story where the FBI comes in on a town and start looking for this girl, start digging holes everywhere, looking for this buried girl. And it's like this gigantic story, this national news story. Finally, they try to pay the ransom. That kind of goes south. The guy basically runs off and they end up finding an abandoned car. In that car is like a picture of a dude with a police hat. Like, how dumb can you be to leave a picture of you in costume? And the car is registered in a certain name of a guy who lives in Florida who makes ventilated boxes. Come on. Mm-hmm. So they kind of have a lead, but they're running out of time. So the dad ends up paying the ransom. And luckily they don't hear anything at first, but after a little while, she comes out of the box and she's found, which is a miracle because she's a 20-year-old girl in a box for days. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that causes psychologically, but if you did that to me, I don't, I wouldn't be okay.
Yep.
So it's crazy. The guy gets a life sentence, and I think somebody else gets sentenced, and then he's let out of prison time after time again. And to this day, I'm not sure that anyone knows where he's at. Mm. He even practiced medicine in another state for a while. Same guy. Terrifying. Buried this girl. It's terrifying. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people are more scary than the spirits.
Mm-hmm. Well, you got to remember, every spirit used to be a person.
Oh,
and most of the time, if they're still around for some reason,
facts,
then they have some unfinished business. Or we've got a number of stories of folks with unfinished business or something that they started that they didn't quite get to finish, and it's kind of itching at them.
Yeah, that's true. So, and sometimes, like the ghosts are asking for help. You know, like they want you to solve the case, and you get involved in something like that. So you hear those kinds of stories. Demons you don't want to mess with. We don't even go there on this podcast.
No, we don't go there on the tour either. We stick mostly with ghosts.
Yeah. Well, who you going to call is a question that comes to mind, and I believe the answer is the Lawrenceville Ghost Tours. This Halloween season, when you get into Lawrenceville, there's tons and tons more spooky stories like these on the tour and more. Maybe give us some information about the tour, when it's starting, how long it's running for, all that kind of good stuff.
Sure. So we'll get started just on weekends in September.
Okay.
And then as we go through October, we're going to start on the weekends, and then we're going to start extending it to Thursdays and Sundays. And then by the last week of October, we're going to have it every night.
Okay.
And on weekends, a lot of times we have doubles and we have on-call guides, so that if we get tons of people wanting to come out, we can handle that. Wow. And in addition to just the regular walking tour, which is about a 90-minute tour around downtown Lawrenceville, you start at the Aurora Theater and you basically walk a loop and you get back to the Aurora Theater. There is, for the more adventurous folks, there is a haunted cemetery tour.
Ooh,
and that also starts at the Aurora, but you walk down the road to the historic Lawrenceville Cemetery. First person buried there was 1819, we think.
Wow.
The first headstone, I think, is from early 1820s.
Right.
But we actually have a guide who'll walk you through some of the cemetery. You'll get opportunities to explore different parts of the cemetery, hear some factual, historical information, but also...
Wait, do you hear that? I could have swore I heard something.
Yeah.
Noises.
Sounds like somebody wants to get into the cemetery.
That's
or get out of the cemetery.
This is unscripted, folks. Continue. I'm sorry.
So that's one tour for the more adventurous. If you are interested in more of a little bit of a good time, we do have a haunted pub crawl. So we've got a guide. He'll take you to the more well-visited establishments on the square. A couple of restaurants, partners.
As you go.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But they have a fun time. They go down. It's a little bit. It's not quite as family friendly as you can imagine.
Sure.
But it's a lot of fun. They have a lot of, and that's different dates. I think we've got a couple of weekend dates, but we've got a couple of middle of the week dates for the people who.
That's a great idea.
Don't want to make it to Friday.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that idea. The pub crawl ghost tour.
Well, and something that we're really rolling out this year, trying to be more intentional about, is making space for private tours.
Okay.
So we've had a number of groups who are really interested in this. If you get a group of 10 friends together, then it's basically the same price to take a private tour as if you bought a ticket for each of your 10 friends.
I gotcha. That makes sense.
And so you can go in with a couple of different families or a small group of friends, and you get a guide all to yourself. You can schedule what time you'd like that to go out.
Very cool.
Depending on guide availability. But we found that especially last year when COVID locked down a lot of things, that really helped some families feel safe coming out and still doing it because they were with people that they knew and with people that they felt comfortable with. So that's always a possibility as well.
And so when you're getting a guide, you can go on this tour multiple times. Like you might hear some different stories from different guides.
No, this year we've got 4 different guides on the regular walk-in tour. And each of them, the thing about storytelling is there's no script per se.
Right.
There's a story and there's a way the story generally goes, but each guide is encouraged to make it their own.
Right.
In addition to just making it their own, each of the guides is takes on a historical persona. And so you'll get guides from, we've got a prospector from the early 1800s out there.
Wonderful.
We've got a Bobby Bubbly, an entertainer.
That's fun for the kids.
And we've got
and adults alike.
Yeah, a few more. And so folks can come out and they you get a lot of the historical information and you get the stories, but you also get this guide's fun.
The entertainment value.
This fun perspective on the different stories.
How did you get into this personally? Like, when did you first start doing this?
Sure. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I was contacted by the folks looking for some new guides for the ghost tour. And I'd never done storytelling a day in my life other than the stories you tell to friends.
Okay.
And I'd done a little bit of acting around town. And so storytelling.
Was that your background, acting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some people, storytelling has some similarities to just straight up script acting.
Right.
The biggest difference is exactly what I was explaining, that it's not really scripted. It's a little more improvisational.
Right.
And it depends on who you're telling the story to.
Right.
If you got a group of Girl Scouts on your tour, your stories are going to look a little bit different than if you have a group of mid-30s bachelors all coming out for a fun time.
Exactly.
And so
Netflix is not going to do that for you, people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you're able to kind of adjust the story a little bit. And as part of the training for a new guide, they not only teach you how to do the stories, but they also teach you a lot of the basics of storytelling. And so as I started to learn more about it, I really started to latch onto it as an art form. And just the flexibility that's there, the natural, kind of the way it naturally connects to us as humanity.
Yeah.
Because we really do tell stories all the time.
Of course. It's the language of all of us, for sure.
Yeah, you get home from work and you want to tell somebody about this thing that happened to you today, and it all of a sudden starts sounding like, well, I was sitting there at the lunch table or whatever it might have been. And so I really started latching onto it. And then once I got audiences in front of me and started being able to lead folks on this tour, it just, I fell in love with it.
Interesting that you say that, and it does remind me that a large part of our history, and something that has been going on for longer than 200 years, is that history of storytelling and spinning a yarn, those Southern charms, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, this also carries on that tradition of that kind of storytelling, where you're one-on-one with the audience, you're one-on-one with a group of people, and you're able to perform. Like, it's the precursor to stand-up comedy. It's the precursor to a lot of things. It's just, how do I entertain my friends and family by, my grandma, she could spin a yarn. Like, you were there for days over some little story about this little thing that happened, but it would just get stretched into this Lord of the Rings epic by the time she was done.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, and the thing about spinning a yarn is they're always true.
Oh, yeah, of course.
They might be embellished a little bit, but they're always true.
They're based in truth, right?
And that's actually every story that we have on the tour is based off a true story that happened in Lawrenceville. So it's either some of the stories we've looked through some of the different histories, different news articles that have been read, and we pulled stories from there.
Right.
Some of it is we'll be walking on a tour and we'll get to a certain spot and someone will tug the guide's shoulder and say, let me tell you about what happened to me when I was down here 10 years ago. Or
that's the great part about it, is that you have a factual basis that gets under your skin, like the 11 Alive thing, like, I believe I've seen that news story, You're like, wait a minute. Oh yeah. I remember hearing that, or so-and-so said something about that, or were they just embellishing? And the thing about those kind of experiences, like when you have something in your office that's moving around, or your home that's moving around, or you hear the creak in the old building, and something's making that, noise. What is that? Holy cow, and your mind goes there. You start to convince yourself that, well, it's not something supernatural. But what if it is? And the what if is tantalizing. It's super interesting, right? And you kind of want to go, well, what if? And that question really opens up the doors to all sorts of fun, all sorts of possibilities.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you don't get too close. As long as it's not demonic. Just saying.
There you go.
Man, anything else that we can talk about on this podcast that folks need to know to get down to Lawrenceville and hit up this ghost tour?
Trying to think.
Did you hear that? No? Something moved.
I suppose if we're quiet waiting for it, it's probably not
I
going
don't
to come.
think the ghosts like us talking about this. Probably not. I think...
Well, actually...
Okay.
Us being recorded like this, it's one of the best ways to experience something paranormal. I don't know if you know this, but if you ever have an inkling to search for anything paranormal in a space that you think might be a little spooky, one of the best things you can do is turn on a recorder.
Really?
And we've actually done this down at the cemetery. We've got a recording. It's on an old tape recorder.
Whoa.
And the previous director and manager of the ghost tours was down there walking around, hoping that something might present itself. And it's not until the very end of the tape, and you actually get to hear this on the Haunted Cemetery tour, but it's not till the very end of the tape when you hear something and it's clear. Like you hear wind and you hear the clanking of the gate and you hear this woman's voice, but you definitely hear something that you can't quite explain. Because seeing a ghost is one of the most rare occurrence. I mean,
right. But hearing
some people do, but you have to be. I mean, it's really special circumstances. Generally.
So it's possible that when we play this back, we're going to hear something that we didn't necessarily experience during the show.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have no idea how this building is.
Well, it's old,
but it looks like there's been some renovation done here.
Yeah, it's old.
So I imagine that.
Yeah, it's wild. And anniversary year and all, So
there you go.
All right, you were saying though. So if folks want to go on this Lawrenceville tour, how can they get in touch? How can they schedule?
Best way to do is go on the Aurora Theater's website. They've got a tab for haunted happenings. Okay. And you can go on there and just book straight online. You can, of course, call their box office and book through there. Okay. If you want to do a private tour, you do have to contact the box office. Either send them an email or call them.
It could be better this year than it's ever been. Because, Bicentennial, 200 years at Lawrenceville, those ghosts want to party too. And when they get excited, things happen. So you don't want to miss it this year. Check out Lawrenceville Ghost Tours. Head over to the website and check it out. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Thanks for being on the podcast, coming sharing these stories. I'm a little freaked out, but I have Reese's, so I'll eat some of those and probably forget the whole thing. Guys, go to the website and check out this tour, and don't forget to subscribe to the Lawrenceville Bicentennial Podcast. Until next time, be safe out there.
Be spooky.
Be spooky. I know I heard something.